what I want to do. Okay. So welcome everyone. It's November. It's hard to believe. This is our, I think, 8th Husky bite in a row. It's dark outside. The sun just went down, it seems, while we were chatting. We have a featured speaker, and we also have a co-host as usual, which is the tradition we started this fall. Before we get started, I just want to kind of explain the format. We have about 20 minutes of a webinar, and then we have Q&A. We call a hard stop at 7:15 if there's still questions going on, but you can always feel free to contact the speaker. And so this evening's Husky Bites is sponsored by Sean Hawkinson, who works at Lempia Summerfield Cats, which LLC, and he is a patent attorney, and I met him just last week. He was motivated to contact me as a result of the earlier webinar that we had featuring prolific invention by Orhan. And so as a patent attorney, he reached out and I'm like, hey, you might be interested in this evening's presentation. And he said, well, how about if I sponsor that? And so thank you so much for your corporate sponsorship from LSK. All right, and so now what I would like to do is just point out we are live streaming this. We did have a glitch one week, but so far it seems to be working. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and introduce the co-host. So our co-host this evening is Brad Turner, who graduated with a BS in software engineering in 2017. He distinguished himself while he was here on campus, as we were discussing. He was a very, very active person in the Pavlis Honors College. He became an innovation fellow. He helped establish the makerspace here on campus because he was excited about having a place where students could be creative. He had multiple internships with Handshake, which is a company founded by our own students, our own Michigan Tech students, launched here in Houghton, and it's now a really successful company. That was his first job as well. And then 6 months ago, he moved to Philadelphia to work at Blackfin, which is a small startup neuroscience company. And I hope I hit the highlights there, Brad. And I'm going to leave it to you to please introduce. So Brad is my co-host. And if you have questions for Brad, you can load Q&A. Between the two of our speakers, they can answer any question you have about the Pavlis Honors College. And so Brad, would you go ahead and introduce Mary Raber, please?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be able to co-host this and to be here with Mary. Mary was one of my mentors in college and someone I learned a lot from being involved in the Pavlis Honors College. And so Mary has done a ton of things well at Michigan Tech, and I knew her best as both a teacher, TA, and then a mentor in the Honors College. And she now is an assistant dean with the Honors College, kind of a self-title of the Chief Doing Officer, which we'll talk more about today with the Idea Hub. And just as a quick background, Mary, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, studied mechanical engineering, has many years of experience in industry before coming to Michigan Tech, and is actually now also getting her PhD in mechanical engineering at Michigan Tech.
Yes. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now because we have some slides to help walk us through our discussion tonight. And I wanted to just point out on this first slide here, first couple of slides, while I'm talking, feel free to grab a blank sheet of paper and pen if you can. And then we'd love to know who's in the audience. So in the chat window, feel free to introduce yourself, your name, and then what do you do? A word or phrase that describes your day job and what you do for fun. So we will.
And so chat is enabled. So you can reach out to us and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Yeah.
So chat is so some people may not have used this before even, but so if you go down to the bottom of your choices there, if you should see something called chat. If you don't see it, click on more, and then you'll be able to click on chat, and it should bring up a little field for you to be able to write something about yourself.
Yep. And if you're more familiar with using the Q&A function, you can also post information there. So. All right, so again, So I already went through introductions, but Brad and I are have known each other for a long time now, and Brad is still remains one of my all-time favorite students. So you'll understand why after you hear from Brad this evening. And we're both very happy to be joining you at this evening's Husky Bites event and sharing our journeys in solving wicked problems. So tonight we're going to explore some of the mindsets and methods for solving wicked problems and share some examples of those mindsets and methods in action, not only at Michigan Tech, but Brad will share some examples from his time after graduation. And to get us started, Brad is going to kick us off with, we're going to try an activity. We haven't done this before on a webinar, in a webinar setting, but we're going to give it a try anyway.
Yeah, great. So I know Mary just asked everyone if you have an opportunity to grab a sheet of paper and a writing utensil of some sort. And what we're going to do here is to have you pick a person. It could be one of these 4 images that you have here on the screen, or it could be one of us, your facilitators here, maybe someone else you're in the room with. And what we're going to ask you to do is to look at that person and try to draw a portrait of that person without looking at your sheet of paper. So I'll do this as well. We'll also participate. And so, Mary, I can have a timer here.
Yes.
All right, so let's get this queued up. And so anyone who has their paper ready to go, we're going to put 1 minute on the clock.
You can't even glance. You can't even glance at your paper. Okay.
Nope, just stare. Look right at the person who you're drawing.
It's tempting. It's way too tempting.
All right, and go ahead and start.
I'm trying to do it, but it's really, all I would need to do is glance and I would cheat. I'm trying to draw you, Brad, and don't ask me to show you the picture.
Oh, but that's the best part.
Oh, see, I glanced.
You're all right, just keep going.
It's really hard not to look at the paper when you're
it's terrible.
We still have 30 seconds left. So make sure you make sure you've covered the eyes, the nose, got the whole thing. Add some hair in there if you have a chance.
You have no eyes, you have glasses. I have no idea where the glasses are anymore.
I think that counts. I hope we do have some folks trying this at home. If not, it's just the 3 of us.
I think we do.
All right, so we have 3, 2, 1, and we're gonna go ahead and stop there. Are you gonna share, Janet? Are you gonna?
It doesn't look very human.
That's great. I mean, it's better than mine. Mine clearly doesn't look like a person. I don't know what's going on here. Well, for anyone who did get to participate in this with us, we would love to have you share a few words as to like how that activity made you feel as you were going through it. And we've seen a little bit. Mine's pretty rough too. It looks like a Picasso. So some folks are writing in a little bit of kind of their reactions as well. And you heard some of you heard us kind of laughing and giggling as we struggled our way through this. I would love to hear how folks, what that felt like as you were trying to do that.
It made me feel happy. It made me laugh.
It made you laugh. All right, and we're seeing some of the Q&A too. Pretty nervous that it would be really bad. Yeah, definitely. It looks like some people are mentioning that they've done this before, and it's about keeping the hand position, so they had a strategy in mind as they were going through this. So more people mentioning, it's fun knowing it's going to be horrendous. And someone else, this is why we like feedback in our control systems. It's nice to be able to see what you're doing and to get some feedback versus going in with no visual the whole time. And someone else mentioned it would have been bad if I'd looked anyways, which is very true. I think that the great thing about these is that actually seen a lot of really positive reactions in here. Sometimes we do these activities and people are just very nervous that like they're gonna mess it up or be bad. And sometimes people are like, well, what if the person sees how bad of a job I did drawing them? Like, I might be embarrassed. But it's really great to see everyone share some of these feelings and reactions. And really, we wanted to do this just to kind of set the tone a little bit. That when we're talking about solving wicked problems and we're talking about taking creative approaches to problem solving, sometimes you have to step outside of your comfort zone a little bit and do things that might seem a little silly or a little out there, to make sure that you give yourself space to experiment and to try things that you might not normally do.
Oh, thank you, Brad. That is still one of my favorite activities to do with groups when we're before we start diving into the wicked problems. And this is one of my favorite quotes. We are called to be architects of the future, not its victims. And the kinds of challenges and opportunities we're facing these days really underscores the need to empower people with the tools needed to be architects of the future. So when we're looking at problems, I mean, we face problems every day, all the time. We're solving problems, right? And generally, problems present a challenge of some sort, and we're working our way toward a solution. And it's a pretty straightforward process because we know what to do. We've done it before. We've seen other people solve a similar problem before. But with wicked problems, it looks more like this. By definition, there's no clear path of getting there. It's a very messy and chaotic process. And at the end of it, you may end up someplace completely different than what you envisioned at the beginning. So when we know that graduates are going to be facing these types of problems routinely, we need to be sure that we're preparing them to solve these types of problems. And one of the processes that works really well to address wicked problems is called the design thinking process. It was developed at the Stanford Design School, and it's widely used in a variety of industries and more recently in educational settings. It's an approach that integrates the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for the organization's success. And at its core, design thinking is human-centered. So meaning that we keep the needs of the people that we're designing for at the center of everything that we do. We want to first dispel some of the myths associated with innovation and creativity. So we're going to pose a question in the Zoom poll here. Just a yes or no answer. Do you consider yourself to be a creative person? And I think, oh, there we go. Poll's all ready.
Well, it's looking like 75% believe ourselves to be a creative person.
Yes, that's great. That's pretty typical to what we see. Yep, it looks like we're going to end up right around that 75-25 range. So another question, and this one we're going to ask you to answer in the chat or the Q&A. What is the most creative thing, most creative task or activity that you've done today? Oh, creating a Dungeons and Dragons character out of modeling clay. I like that. Wrote a paragraph for a writing assignment. Oh, spun wool and embroidered. Some very creative things. Troubleshooting issues, making a new ornament, model railroad roadbed. Very cool. Lots of creative stuff happening. I love this. Raking leaves into piles. That can be pretty creative. Especially if you have kids that are constantly jumping in the piles of leaves and messing them up. So you have to start all over again.
One person thought of a comic book character Gordon the Ogre.
That's wonderful.
And Stephen co-hosted a music Zoom class.
Wonderful. Great examples of creativity in our everyday lives. So it's one of the challenges we often hear from people when we get into this design thinking process is, you know, I'm not creative, I can't be innovative. But in reality, you know, most of us do feel that we're pretty creative beings and we're doing creative things all the time. But more importantly, creativity is really about finding problems worth solving and then finding ways to creatively solve them. So it's not about whether or not you can draw someone's portrait well. That's whether or not you have artistic talent. Being creativity is more about you know, pulling in all the resources and knowledge and perspectives from other people and putting all that together in ways that allows you to come up with creative solutions. With the innovation and design thinking process, there are several mindsets that really help us get the most out of the process. One of them is creative confidence. So not necessarily that you feel you're a creative person, but that you have the confidence to put yourself out there creatively, to share your ideas. Creative confidence is something that we often lose over time. Research shows that a 5-year-old is much more creative or feels much more creative than a 40 or 50-year-old adult. So there are many factors that are at play there. Our educational system, where we have to always answer things in the correct way, or peer pressure is another one where we feel less comfortable putting out our ideas. But you really need to have that creative confidence to get the most out of this process. Other mindsets that are helpful, failing forward. So we want to fail and learn from it as quickly as we can so that we move on. I mentioned earlier, Brad, with the activity that Brad did, we'd never done that on a webinar before, wasn't sure how it would work, but we tried it anyway. And next time we have an opportunity like this, we'll probably do something different. Navigating uncertainty is a big issue, right? We don't know what that future will hold. We know there are lots of challenges in front of us, lots of opportunities, but being able to navigate our way through that is important. Valuing diverse perspectives. When you're trying to solve wicked problems, you cannot do it on your own. You need diverse perspectives and to bring in more people from a variety of fields and backgrounds and experiences to come up with those innovative solutions. And then finally, radical collaboration. We want to be able to work with large teams, small teams, but collaborate and do it in an effective way. So we use this design thinking process, which consists of these 5 steps, and that although it's presented as a linear process, it's not at all linear. When you're in the midst of it, it looks just as messy as the problem that you're trying to solve. So it's a process that you have to trust will get you to the right place if you use these different steps or phases. Another reason we use design thinking is because research shows that it has tremendous impacts on both the organization and the individual that are using the process. So if you're trying to innovate solutions and bring about change in an organization, using this process really helps to build trust, improves the quality solution or the solution quality, improves the implementation and adaptation of the solution, and also just really expands the networks and enhances the resources available. But probably most interesting is that it also has a lot of individual benefits. People do develop more creative confidence, they're more ready and able to collaborate. So a whole host of benefits that come out of using this process. So Brad and I are going to kind of tag team here and share a few different examples of this design thinking process at work at Michigan Tech and beyond. One that I'm going to share first is a project we did with first year engineering program where we integrated design thinking into the curriculum. So this was a project that we had some funding to do. And if you're familiar with the engineering fundamentals courses, the first year engineering courses, there's traditionally a project or a team-based project that students do together. And it's generally a prescribed problem. But what we wanted to do is see what would happen, what would it look like if students were given the freedom to choose their own problem and then use the design thinking process to come up with the solution. And so we, did lots of fun activities with them around creativity, lots of prototyping and testing with low resolution prototyping materials. And at the end of it, students had their own version of a design expo where they got to present the things that they created, and some really interesting, not only problems or opportunities that they chose, but innovative solutions that they came up with.
Well, and so Mary, I'm going to just jump in here, and we're going to take a sidestep. I want the participants to understand that this first year engineering curriculum is one of the incredible strengths of the Michigan Tech College of Engineering majors. There's a common first year set of courses, basically. So it doesn't matter if you're mechanical engineering or undecided, you take this class, right? And so it's not wasted, like it is at many other universities where it starts differentiating at the first semester. So we don't differentiate by and large until the third semester. And so you can truly be an undecided major, and we actually have one of the majors that's the fastest growing major is the kind of Bachelor of Science in Engineering, which is the one that sort of corresponds with not knowing what I don't really know what I want to major yet, but I think I might want to do engineering. So all right, I'm stepping you back.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. The first year engineering course sequence is really a wonderful experience for the students. And this was just a way of kind of taking a different look at it and a different approach. And an interesting part of this project is after we prototyped it in one semester, in the following semesters, we actually combined students from first year engineering and first year business courses together to let them work on identifying a problem and coming up with a solution. So that was a really interesting way to give them some interdisciplinary experience as well. So that's one example of kind of taking an innovative approach to, taking a different approach to innovating curriculum. And now Brad is going to share an example of some work he did while he was at Michigan Tech using the design thinking process.
Yeah, so if you were here kind of early when we were just having some fun chatting before we officially kicked off the webinar, Janet kind of hinted at my involvement in the makerspace at Michigan Tech, which, Mary, if you want to go to the next slide, we can actually talk about what the makerspace was before it was the makerspace. So when I came to Michigan Tech, this is actually the 2015 picture. Was more of what I saw was the basement of the Memorial Union building. That was kind of the bowling alley that was getting taken apart because it was no longer being used very much and was pretty expensive to maintain. But this used to be a lively place that a lot of students, spend time and create a lot of memories. And we had an opportunity to actually transform this space into what we'd call a makerspace, or a place where students can explore ideas, to come up with their own solutions to problems, to just kind of get crafty and try things out. But before we did that, we kind of wanted to again apply this design thinking process. And so, Mary, if you want to jump to the next slide. I think one of the things I'm most proud of during my time at Michigan Tech is what we could have done. Say we didn't use any of the things we knew about design thinking. We could have just said, okay, well, we have to create a makerspace. We could have looked at what other makerspaces looked like, just said, well, okay, it works like this elsewhere. Let's just do that same thing here. Let's invest in a bunch of technology, put it down there, and then it should hopefully just work. But we wanted to do this a little differently because we wanted to make sure that we weren't just basing this space on our own assumptions, like how I was viewing, this project, or maybe how Mary or other folks who were involved in the project, like, what they thought was the right solution or right kind of way to build a makerspace. So we actually took a step back and we started by interviewing quite a few students about their own experiences on campus, trying to understand where there was a need to be creative and to try out different types of technology or tools, and had our own general idea. And then we actually invited the entire campus community to participate in a co-design, kind of like very quick design thinking activity with us, so that everyone could have a say in this process. So this is actually a picture where we had, I think there were almost 100 attendees who showed up on a Friday night, I think for like 3 hours, to come out and to interview each other about what types of things they would want out of a makerspace, to help define specifically what types of problems would be best to focus on first, and then to actually do some sketching and prototype some really quick solutions and share them with each other to get feedback. So instead of us just going in and doing this and saying, this is what it's going to be, we instead had signals from all these students and faculty and staff from across campus that we're able to use to initially launch the space. And I think one other thing to note here is that we didn't just go from that to like, okay, we're going to get a ton of money and do everything all at once. We really wanted to take an iterative approach, which is, again, kind of one of the fundamentals of design thinking, is that you kind of focus on one problem, you try it out, see where you get, and then you can come back and do the next thing or kind of redefine the problem. So we started out pretty basic and pretty small with kind of a limited set of technology and tools. We got some funding, luckily, and some sponsorships. And we were eventually able to open the space and invite students, faculty, and staff to come in and use the space and to help us continue to build it out together. So this is an early drawing that we had worked with. It's fine. And this is just one example of what we thought it might look like at the beginning. We probably launched with like maybe half of this actually in the space and ready to go. And we ended up, it probably never actually looked like this, because we learned quickly that like, oh, actually people don't want to use it this way. They want to do this other thing once you actually got them in there. And so during, I think, my senior year at Michigan Tech, we really just were testing out the space in a variety of ways, thinking about, oh, what would it be like if you host a class down here? What if you invited, companies when they come on campus for career fair to like demo some of their cool stuff that they do in the space, to do like tutorials for students. And we hosted all sorts of events that were really about just trying to learn like what's working, what's not working, and where can we continue to improve and build out this space. And so I've kept in touch a little bit with some of the members who help run the space now since I've left. And from my understanding, they've already changed it quite a bit and evolved it. One thing I think that's really interesting is we built all of these tables, all of like the workshop tables when I was there. And I think like that year and even the year after, like we'd actually already replaced all the tops of the tables, because our original design that we came up with as a group didn't work well for what people wanted to do. We'd had, you can see kind of these like planks on top of these tables, and things were getting stuck in between them. There wasn't like a flat surface, but we learned quickly and were able to iterate and to actually just swap out those tables. Luckily, we hadn't spent, like hundreds or thousands of dollars on surfaces and things like that for the space, that then we'd have to consider like, oh, do we have to go in now and like get more funding to actually get the right thing in here? Because we'd done it kind of in this really iterative approach.
So the floors are the original floors?
Oh yeah, you can kind of see like in a couple of these photos here, that is the actual bowling alley lanes that have been in there.
That's great.
That
was
the president of the university at the time was really excited about keeping that kind of like heritage of the space, I guess.
Yeah.
So we were able to fill it in kind of right in between and create. There's actually really beautiful like wood floor down there.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Impressive.
And it's a great space that, as Brad said, continues to live on, and it's really a living prototype. Every time I go into the space, the students have done something else to change it and make it better.
Well, and it's almost like the energy of the students has been preserved, but in a different way, right? And so the energy of bowling is turned into a different energy.
Definitely, yeah. So another example that I'll share quickly here is how we're using this process to solve wicked problems is the Tech Forward initiative. So when President Kobach joined in 2018, he hosted a series of conversations, Tech Forward conversations. Anyone on campus was invited to participate. And there were a lot of discussions and a lot of brainstorming of ideas around, what should Michigan Tech be focusing on to address the needs of the 21st century and make sure we're preparing our students for that. And so 9 Tech Forward initiatives were created at that time. And one of them is looking at education for the 21st century. So if we know that 65% of today's students will have jobs that don't even exist yet, how do we prepare students for that? So that's what you would call a wicked problem, right? So we know that the skill sets that have been identified that are necessary to succeed in the 21st century include some of those listed here. This, again, comfort with uncertainty, having a global perspective, being self-aware, taking risks. And you'll probably see there's definitely some overlap between these and the mindsets that I shared earlier around design thinking. So there's some good connection there. And what we did to start tackling this problem, the first thing we did was created an organization that we call Idea Hub. And it's an interdisciplinary team of faculty, students, and staff who meet regularly to go through the design thinking process and develop transformative educational content and approaches that can help address the needs of the 21st century workforce. So we, at any given time, there are probably 70 or more people engaged in different aspects of this problem, this opportunity. Right now, we're focusing in on, reimagining the first year experience to make it a more holistic experience for the students. The general education program, if we were to redesign that from a clean slate, what could that look like? We're looking at ways to increase the amount of and opportunities for interdisciplinary teaching and learning, so crossing those disciplinary boundaries. And then finally, global engagement. How do we make sure that every student at Michigan Tech has an opportunity to have some global experience before they graduate? So we're focusing our efforts around these things right now, and it's just been such an exciting project to be part of. And now Brad's going to share a couple of examples of his work after graduation.
Believe it or not, we still use just as many sticky notes outside of design thinking at Michigan Tech. This is a photo of actually, I worked at a company called Handshake for 4 years after graduation, which is a software company that helps college students find internships and jobs. And this is just one experience that I had actually doing what we'd call a design sprint, which is like having a very focused week of problem solving around a specific problem statement with design thinking.
Sorry about that.
Some slide jumping. But yeah, I think the really cool thing for me is we took a lot of the stuff that I learned and applied on campus and was able to actually apply that to solving problems at Handshake. So the specific one I actually want to call out, you might imagine if you're building a software platform to help students find jobs, one of the core questions you'd want to know about your students is like, what types of jobs are they looking for? And we often found ourselves like really trying to just ask students that question kind of point blank in the product and saying, what type of job are you looking for today? Mary, if you go to the next slide, I actually have a screenshot of an example here of on the student profile, we'd ask them, like what cities do you want to work in and like what roles? And students would have to type out, like, oh, I want to be a software engineer or a mechanical engineer. But it's kind of interesting, Janet mentioned that you have a lot of students today who are coming into engineering who are saying like, oh, I don't even know necessarily what type of engineering I want to do. And so you might imagine there's students who are also saying, well, I don't know what type of engineering internship I want or even job after graduation because I I don't really know how to describe that yet. I'm not sure. I don't know how to put that into one word. Well, that might seem obvious, but the more you're kind of in this zone, as we were at Handshake, we just kind of assumed that a lot of students would know what they're looking for. But what we finally did is we took a step back and said, what if we applied some of these things we knew about design thinking, and we actually went back and interviewed some students and tried to understand what the barriers were for them to actually share this information with us. And what we found is you heard a lot of that from students. It's like, well, I'm getting this degree, or I kind of know this thing, but like, I don't really know how to describe that. Like, I have a sense, but like, I don't know how to put that into like 2 words in this box that you're asking me to fill it in. And so eventually we were able to, like, after we heard this from students, we were able to go back and say, well, maybe our goal of asking students to tell us, like getting a certain number of students to tell us exactly what they're looking for, was the wrong goal. We were actually solving the wrong problem. We needed to reevaluate and say, how can we learn what types of jobs students are looking for versus how can we get them to tell us? And that opened up a whole nother set of solutions that we could start exploring. Mary earlier kind of shared that graph that was like, you have this line from here's what I think the problem is to here's the clear solution that I'm expecting to tackle. And by interviewing students and actually learning more about the problem space, we're able to open up the door to a whole new set of solutions that allowed us actually to combine some really interesting technology from our data science team at Handshake to instead ask them what they're looking for, to look at the jobs they're actually clicking on and the things that they're actually maybe favoriting or saving for later, and say, wow, it actually looks like you're interested in being a sales like representative, or a like, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of different examples that we were able to walk away with. And we actually almost doubled like the amount of students who we had an idea of what they were looking for so that we could give them better recommendations. And so I think that's a really cool example of how you can sometimes get stuck in like, well, clearly this is what I'm trying to do, and here's how we need to do it. And when you can step back, when you can take the time to look at the processes and say like, oh, maybe if we were a little more human-centered here, if we did some more interviewing and understood the problem, we might have a whole different set of solutions that we could explore.
Thanks, Brad. That's a great example of the process at work. So just wrapping things up, we, again, Michigan Tech is using the tools and mindsets of design thinking to look at ways of solving these wicked problems, and helping students to learn these tools and mindsets as well, so that they can be better prepared for the future. It's a long process. We've been embarking on this adventure of building a culture of innovation at Michigan Tech since 2000, which is about the time I started with the enterprise program, which is a very innovative approach to education. And over the years, we've been able to add new things, new experiences, new initiatives that are at the same time helping transform the campus to one that's much more innovation focused. And so we're really looking forward to what the future holds as we continue to learn and grow through solving these wicked problems. And so with that, we'd love to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Mary. I'm going to share my screen for a moment. And please use this time to start loading up your questions. You can use either chat or Q&A, because Mary and Brad and me, between the 3 of us, we should be able to catch your question. So thank you, Mary, for the experiment of having chat open. That was awfully fun. And so I want to, while people are loading up their questions, I want to, first of all, thank Mary and Brad. It was wonderful to be a co-host with you, Brad, software engineering graduate from 3 years ago. And Mary, I think of you as the Associate Dean of the Graduate College, but I know you've got a lot of other titles as well. So a quick plug for next week. Next week we are featuring Waste Plastics Are Taking Over the World and the Solution is Circular. And this features Professor David Schonard, who is Chemical Engineering, Richard and Bonnie Robbins Chair in Sustainable Materials He's the director of the Sustainable Futures Institute. And people, students and future students out there who are interested in the kinds of learning that you can do in this whole field of sustainability, it's going to be a great opportunity to ask questions related to that. The co-host with that will be Felix Adam, who graduated from chemical engineering in 2012 and who now works at Shell. Please, folks, if anyone is interested in sponsoring a Husky Bites webinar, 100% of your donation goes to support the Student Scholarship Fund for all students at Michigan Tech. And so I encourage you to just drop a quick email to engineering@mtu.edu. Thank you again for this evening's sponsor. It was really helpful. So I wanted to show you the lineup for the rest of the year. I feel like I'm missing a week though. Wait, I'm missing one. Am I missing one? Yeah, no, I already pointed out David Scheinert next week. After that, we're going to be hearing from Bill Endres in mechanical engineering about some of the work that our students did pivoting during the pandemic from COVID to codes. And I think you guys are going to enjoy that. Then we have our famous alum. We have lots of famous alumni, but this is Marty Lagina, who is one of the two brothers on Cursive Oak Island. And then mechanical engineering chair Bill Predabon will be the co-host with me. And so Marty's going to reflect on how it's about saying yes to the quest, saying yes sometimes, which is kind of part of what I was hearing from Brad. And then the last two lined up, we are going to be focusing on weather and modeling climate changes. So first will come Pengfei Zhui, who is in civil and environmental engineering, with co-host Guy Meadows, who was actually featured in the summer. You may remember him. He was working with us on underwater sonar and imaging with sonar. And then our very last one of the year is, of course, it's got to focus on snow. So we've got Ray Shaw, from physics professor, with co-host also another physics professor, Will Cantrell. So that's our lineup, and I hope you can join us for all of these. I am going to stop sharing now, and we can go ahead and take a look at the Q&A. And so Brad, you've probably been looking at the questions coming in, and feel free to pick a question to start answering.
Yeah, I think first one I'd love to just clarify here. A couple of questions around what the term ideate meant. So Mary, can you define ideate for us?
Sure, I can try. No. I think, I read that question differently. I thought they were referring to Idea Hub, and what does Idea Hub stand for? So ideate is just generating ideas, and it's using different tools to, creatively come up with new ideas. And we use a lot of different tools to foster that. Brainstorming is probably one of the most common ones, but there are many others that we can use.
Great. That was a simple answer. Yeah, I think it's funny sometimes we get so used to our own words and our own language that we forget, like, oh, right, this is not a word that people use on a regular basis all the time.
All right, so Brad, here's a question for you. What advice do you give to a hardworking person looking to find a job at a fast-growing startup?
Oh gosh, great question. So I was really lucky with my job that I got out of Michigan Tech, in the sense that I mentioned very early, before we officially kicked this off, that I had another mentor in college named David Schull, who got me involved in Mubboard and the program University Innovation Fellows. Well, he was also the person who helped me land my job at Handshake when graduating, and actually when I was still there too, as an intern. And so one of my pieces of advice then, I guess, would just be to, if you do have connections and you have people who you enjoy working with, like, reach out to them about working with them, and how excited you'd be to be able to work with them more, and if you're excited about their company they're at or the types of problems they're solving, would definitely recommend that. And then I would also say, just remember that not like the application that you submit that has a list of requirements and things that you have to have done when you're graduating, it's probably not like hard requirements. And a lot of students, they read a list of requirements for a job, and like there's one thing on the list that they don't meet and they choose not to apply. There's
Right.
almost no harm that can come from applying to a job, even if you don't think you're perfectly qualified. Get out there, get applying, and try it and see what happens. I applied for so many internships when I was at Michigan Tech that I didn't end up getting, didn't even end up hearing back, but it helped me get better at writing a cover letter, helped me like break through that slightly uncomfortable piece of like finding someone on LinkedIn that you really don't know and reaching out to them and being like, hi, is there any chance you could, refer me? So, maybe if you're worried about failing, like you could consider it more practice. And if you happen to get the job, then that's great. But if not, at least you're learning a lot along the way and you're kind of getting better at doing these things.
All right, and if anybody wants some friends or whatever we call them on LinkedIn, just always know that you can connect with me. Just Janet Callahan, you got Brad Turner, you got Mary Raber, so you've got 3 people to expand your network with right away. And I love LinkedIn. I don't check in very often, but when I do, it's just really nice to see, who's paying attention to what. I think it's a pretty cool social media hub. So that was about confidence, Brad. And so there's a question from Kristen. Do you have any more advice for gaining creative confidence? So there's sort of like I should apply even though I don't check all the boxes, but then it's like, am I able to do this? Am I able to solve this particular problem?
Mary, do you want to jump in first here?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think like anything else, you develop that confidence with practice. And so, being willing to get outside your comfort zone, kind of test the boundaries of what you're most comfortable with, and putting yourself out there, sharing your ideas, just trying something different. Those are all ways of building your confidence around creativity.
I also think one thing that I personally I used to really struggle with, and now I find some joy in, is I actually really enjoy baking. And baking's kind of a creative endeavor sometimes. But if I challenge myself to try recipes that I have never seen done before, that I don't know what I'm doing. And I burn a lot of stuff, or end up throwing things in the trash. But a lot of times what I'll end up doing is actually taking a picture of it and texting it to my mom in advance and being like, look at what happened. This is awful, but we kind of laugh about it, because she sends me pictures of cakes that have flopped, and she considers herself not creative and a terrible baker, but we can bond over the fact that, you don't nail it every time. And so try to find opportunities to kind of to enjoy the process, right? Even if it's not going exactly as you'd like, or maybe it's not as tasty as you'd like, but you're
what was Mary's phrase? To fail forward.
Exactly. And there's always an opportunity just to order pizza.
Yeah.
So Virgil asks, where is the customer input in the Idea Hub on what they need? So it may be in relative to the design thinking process, and also in what they need graduates to do.
Yeah. So the first year of Idea Hub this past year was almost entirely in the empathy building phase. We literally did hundreds of interviews with everyone from students across different disciplines, faculty, staff, alumni, people working in industry, people that recruit our students, just to gather as much data as we could. And then we also did a lot of benchmarking to see how are other institutions, not just educational institutions, but companies addressing this. And so that was all kind of data or input that we had to synthesize and kind of help us to frame, what exactly are these competencies that we need to be focusing on and helping students to develop.
Brad, do you want to pick the next question?
Oh, yes. I'm actually really, really curious about this one now. There's a question, Mary, about how can a Michigan Tech student learn more about design thinking and become a University Innovation Fellow? And is it competitive to apply?
Yes, so the University Innovation Fellows program is a Stanford-based program, and we do have an application process for that. So if anyone is interested in learning how to apply, please just reach out to me and I can point you in the right direction for that. Our next application window will be opening up during spring semester. But beyond that, I'm working with our current group of University Innovation Fellow students to create a Michigan Tech version that is just widely available to any student who wants to learn the tools and mindsets of innovation, so that we can empower more students to be agents of, leaders of change on campus. So be watching for information on that as well.
And as of right now, can any student join Idea Hub or like to practice using design thinking and to do that?
Yeah, we welcome any student that wants to be involved in this process. We also host workshops throughout the year, and I teach a class in design thinking. I'm teaching one this fall, so I have a group of students that are currently working on some pretty interesting problems.
Very good. So this next, well, it's hard to even know. There's always so many questions. But I want to read some of the things, the creative things people did. Of course, see, they're on the Q&A. Of course, I think people can see this, but like Sean made his own beard oil. That's a funny one.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we've answered that one. So do you guys well, I think Mary, you certainly do, but Brad, do you still use design thinking now in your kind of everyday life outside of work? In other words, not just for work problems.
Yeah, there's actually, at one point in time, I read a book. I don't remember the author, but the book was called, Designing Your Life. Was that it, Mary? Is that okay. And I think that if you want to learn more about how to use design thinking and apply it to your life outside of work, I think that's a great read, and it has a lot of good reflections kind of throughout there about how to actually kind of think about your life more as a set of small experiments and opportunities to learn and to try new things, instead of oh, I have this big goal 20 years out and I'm just doing everything to try and get there every single day. I would say the way design thinking shows up in my life is mostly kind of just encouraging myself to try small experiments or to try new things, or to every once in a while ask myself wait, is this my own assumption? I feel like a lot of times that I find myself just kind of having some strong reaction to something and then kind of reminding myself wait, and if I was at work, I'd be trying to look for more sources, do more research here in a way that I don't normally, and so trying to have more conversations with people and understand just some more perspectives so you can see different ways of looking at a problem that are not just based on your own assumptions.
That just made me chuckle because of I won't tell the story, but yeah, I had a weekend project that was it had me laughing out loud. All right, this question's from Larry. Does a platform exist for you to engage alumni in your problem solving? For example, using the internet to bring others throughout the world into your collaborative groups that look at problems and suggest solution paths?
That is a great question. I am not aware of a specific platform that exists in that way, but we certainly use things like Zoom all the time to engage with people outside of Michigan Tech. There are some platforms that we routinely use in design thinking. Mural is one, where we use the Jamboard feature within Google. Which are great collaboration tools to help large groups of people that aren't co-located share input, share ideas, and design solutions together.
Maybe to build on that question, I guess I interpreted platform a little differently, less about the software and more about is there a space or a group for alumni to also engage virtually or digitally? Because I know you mentioned, like Idea Hub, you have groups of people who are collaborating on things. Do you have to be in Houghton to participate in those?
No, we would absolutely welcome participation from folks outside of Houghton, alumni, industry folks. We are in the stage of the process now where we're starting to create some visual prototypes of concepts that we've developed. And so part of that process is then taking those visual concepts out to the larger community and to different stakeholder groups. And that's another place where it's very important to kind of connect with all of the stakeholders and get their feedback. So if that's a part of the process you'd like to be involved in, we would love to add you to our list.
Great.
And Mary, I put your email out there so people have it. It's just
Great.
MRABER@mtu.edu. All right, do you see any questions you'd like to answer, Brad?
I think there's a lot in the Q&A, but I think the only one that's a question is, oh, I see more now. Oh boy. Wow, okay, let's take this one. Innovation is captivating and can divert, oh wow, I don't actually know how to pronounce this word, deleteriously focused innovation hinders creativity. How do you achieve balance to achieve effective business-driven innovation that's not biased by a leader and is collaborative? What do you think,
That's a
Mary?
great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think that's where using a process like design thinking can be very helpful. It's a process that you go through multiple cycles of what we call flare and focus. And so there are times when you want to be kind of, remove the boundaries and let people just kind of come up with wild and crazy ideas and, bring in lots of information, lots of perspectives. And then there are times where you need to step in and say, okay, now we need to do something with this and we need to focus in. And so if you follow the process, you will find that you can achieve what you're describing there without, creating opportunities for leader bias, too much of the leader bias. There are times when the leader needs to step in and say, okay, time to focus. But yeah, it's one of the ways in which the design thinking process can be very helpful in guiding that creativity.
And maybe one thing to, maybe one thing to add there is thinking about time boxing some like more focused design activities. Mm-hmm. So there's another good book called Sprint that's all about this concept of a like 1 week design sprint. And this is something that came out of, I think, Google Ventures. But the book basically walks through how could you take 1 week and invest it in solving a problem in a focused way throughout the course of that week. And you don't necessarily have to, change any big, huge processes at your company or, get a ton of like long-term buy-in, but you might be able to get a week of a few people's time and really dive deep and try to investigate the problem as much as possible and to try a bunch of solutions. And part of a design sprint, a lot of times is you actually bring in whoever the eventual decision maker will be around kind of the long-term results of the project and make sure that they have an opportunity to contribute and to have what you call a super vote when it comes to deciding decisions so that, you can look at what the team thinks is best, but at the end of the day, they do get to say, because if they don't have a say and you go through this whole process and say, look at this great solution, and they're like, well, I don't like that. I wish you would have done this. You kind of waste a whole week. So there's some really good techniques actually in there as well.
That's really interesting. Well, and so on Mary with those, there's the steps, and the first one was, what was the first one called?
Empathy.
Well, and that's where you're connecting with the user and connecting with the
different stakeholder groups.
All the different stakeholders. Well, and so how do you know when that phase is complete? or complete enough to move on to the next step?
Essentially when you're not hearing anything new. Once you get to the point where any additional interviews, you're kind of hearing the same things over and over again.
Interesting.
Then you can be pretty certain you've captured at least the most important aspects to be building your solution around.
Well, and how do you weight all those things? Because it was interesting. I was reading an interesting article about, I said I wouldn't talk about politics and I'm not going to, but about polling people and how weighting the different groups differently ends up being important to have an accurate result. So how do you weight, all those voices? What if only one person said the most important thing?
Yeah. So right at the beginning of the process, for example, with Idea Hub, one of the first things we did was create what we call a stakeholder map, which is really just mapping out all the different stakeholders we could imagine that we could think of, and then mapping them in a way that kind of defines that priority, right? So if we're designing educational approaches that are going to, impact students. Obviously, students is a priority. The people who will be teaching are a priority. The people that will hire our students are a priority, right? So you kind of weigh their voices more heavily than you would, say, parents or administration at the university. So, yeah.
No, that makes sense.
And one thing I'd add to that is you want to make sure you're not spending too long just trying to get it right. If you spend too long like overthinking, well, it could be this group or it could be that group, you actually could be spending that time testing ideas with people and actually say like, is this working? Versus like, are we making the right decision based on what we think we know or what our assumptions are? And so again, with the idea of failing forward, you do want to keep trying to push yourself to say, maybe we don't have all the answers yet, or maybe we don't know exactly everything, but we know enough where we think this might work. So let's give it a go and see what happens.
Yeah. And that's reflected in the iterative nature of the process, right? It's never just a straight line through those steps. It's a jumping all around as you learn more. And I see your, sorry, one last, or the last question that came in, can you tell us about empathy and the shopping cart exercise? I won't go into details on that, but that's one of my favorite examples, the shopping cart exercise. Dateline did a story on this at the company called IDEO, which is probably about 20 years ago now, but it's if you just Google it or look for it on YouTube, there's like an 8-minute version of this video that the shopping cart exercise at IDEO that is a great illustration of design thinking at work.
Well, it's almost as though this process is, instead of just do it, right? It's like, connect with the community to find out, and then do it and then iterate, right? Now I can't remember all the steps, but I can visualize the blocks. So yeah, I've learned a lot this evening. This is really helpful. So bigger picture, right? I think I just want to kind of bring it back to the Pavlis Honors College. And so Mary, can you just kind of say a little bit about what the Pavlis Honors College is? Just a minute to kind of give the overview of what it is and how the Honors College that we have is distinctive.
Sure. Yeah, the Honors College at Michigan Tech was created about 6 years ago now, and we had an opportunity to create something brand new, and the design thinking process was used as a basis, and it still is today for almost everything we do within the Honors College. But one of the unique things about our honors education at Michigan Tech is that it's not based on GPA or test scores. It was intentionally designed to be an honors program that is open and available to every student at Michigan Tech. And we're really more focused on providing experiential learning opportunities for students and helping them connect those to their major, but also to their future careers through a variety of experiences that the students take on.
Very good. And so one of the things that we've mentioned before are the enterprise teams, which are one of the things, overseen by the Honors College. And so this question, I know that you can't probably answer it for every enterprise team, but it's a question about, again, it's a basic question about the enterprise programs and how this intersects with design thinking.
Yeah. So I can tell you with certainty that every enterprise team uses the problem solving process in some way, right? And there are different ways to approach problems, and there are different processes that work better for different types of problems. So if you're designing a new, engine for some type of motor vehicle, you're going to use the more traditional engineering problem solving approach. But if you're starting with, wide open, how can we help address climate change? That's an area where design thinking can be more helpful. And so, it depends on the enterprise team. I know of several examples of projects where I've run workshops for the students on the team and help them identify challenges that they want to address, and then work through the process to come up with some solutions that they prototype. So yeah, it really depends on what the problem is in terms of what tool sets will be most helpful.
All right, and so we've got a couple of questions left, but I kind of want to, I want the last question to be something Brad can give us a moment or two to think about, which is advice to future students, advice to current students, relative to kind of, the situation we're in now, which is learning is learning is tough. I mean, learning is not taking its same path as before. And so any advice you have about kind of keeping your focus. But so Mary, there's two questions left. So let's take the first one first. Which industries and disciplines or sectors use the design thinking process the most? Are there companies that use it more than others? How widespread is it?
Okay. I think it's becoming more and more popular as a tool in industry. I think the ones that have adopted it earliest and use it probably most effective are those that are in consumer product areas, where there are, customers that you can see and feel and connect with, and use that input to design better solutions around. It's newer to the field of education. And so, I'd say within the past 10 years or so is when design thinking has really become more useful or viewed as a useful tool in education field. So.
All right, and then this question's from Terry. When you think about a problem, do you try to think all about the paths and outcomes? Like do you kind of like explore it all the way down? And then how do you choose a path? Which, right? Yeah.
So again, it comes in the scenario where you're using something like design thinking, it comes back to that iterative approach. Probably with any problem of this type or any challenge of this type, the hardest part is defining the problem that you need to solve. Far too often, organizations will not take enough time to really do that empathy building and understanding the context and the needs of the people and clearly identifying the right problem. And they spend a lot of wasted time and effort and resources chasing the wrong problem. So I think I think it was Einstein, there's a great quote that if I had a problem to solve, I'd spend 95% of the time defining the problem and 5% coming up with the answer or the solution. So it really is important to make sure you're focusing on the right problem. And then it's an iterative approach to, there are many different ways you can decide which approach you're going to try first, but you generate lots of ideas and you use some criteria to figure out what's the most feasible or the best, most likely to have an impact. And you try it. You come up with some low resolution prototype of that idea, get it out in front of people, get their feedback, see what works, what doesn't work, and then just keep iterating.
No, very good. All right. And so Brad, we're all struggling. Give us some advice.
Gosh, yeah, it's actually interesting. I wish I had more college students or like students who are going to be in college in my life that I was talking to on a more regular basis and could understand like more of what that experience has been like for people. I know I trying to work from home and like be going through just what's going on. Like I'm having a hard time focusing, and there's days when I'm just like, what is next? Like what's to come? And I find myself oftentimes just saying like, okay, well, instead of trying to think about decisions about how this is going to play out months from now or years from now, it's like, am I doing well today or tomorrow? And like, what can I try tomorrow to try to do something a little better or a little differently? And I think like that's kind of been I've tried to keep that mindset over the last couple months, is like, are there things that you can be doing to ask yourself like, wait, why is this going the way it is? Do I have an opportunity to try something else and give it a try and see what happens? And hopefully there aren't too many decisions you have to make soon that like will make, have some big outcome as far as like drastically changing the course of whatever you're doing. I think especially for students in college, I know like picking a major can be one of those things that people really stress about, but it actually, when it comes down to it, it's not that hard to change your major. I did it when I was in college. But there's a lot of things I feel like sometimes, there's things that you can just get kind of stuck in feeling like it's a really, really big decision. And there might be opportunities to remind yourself that like, wait a minute, I'm going to be here tomorrow and the next day, and I can try something else, or I might be able to change my mind. And just give yourself space to change your mind, to kind of explore some new things or try something. And if it doesn't work, then try something else.
Oh, very, very apt and relevant to the talk, right? Because it's kind of about iterating, right? And well, so I would like to sincerely thank you both, Brad and Mary, for being our co-host and featured speaker this evening from the Honors College. It was wonderful to spend time with you. This is the favorite part of my week every week. And so we have another 4 weeks coming. And thank you everyone for sharing your evening with us. And good night.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh, thanks. Thanks,
You
Brad.